Hey Facebook, this is Michelle Kramer here, your Live Abundantly life and health coach. Doesn't that sound like a cool intro? Okay, so first of all, I have something very exciting to show you. First of all, I'm using a tripod, so you get to see the pretty part of my office. And then I got a little selfie light. Ooh, oh there. See, looks nice, right? Cool. Balances things out a little bit because I've been using window light up until now. Anyway, so today I'm going to do part 3 in what is become a 4-part series, initially 3 parts, but now 4, on expectations. First day we talked about expectations for ourselves. Yesterday we talked about expectations for physical change, and today I want to talk about expectations for others. So we all have them. It kind of, you've probably heard a lot lately about entitlement mentality and how that's kind of become a burdensome thing in society these days. Comes from expectations, and mostly unrealistic ones. So it's managing those expectations for others that's really important, and honestly kind of ties into our expectations for ourselves, because when it's not only our expectations of others, but meeting the expectations that others have for us. We're imperfect beings. So let's just take some examples, okay? When you get married, you carry expectations. I remember distinctly when Josh and I got married, we didn't live together previously or anything like that. So when we got married, I had all these expectations. I mean, let's be honest, the happily ever after stuff that's ingrained in us from childhood as little girls. That's what we think of. And I had 1 semester left of college after Josh and I got married, and I remember walking around on campus and running into friends of mine, and they would say, "Oh, Michelle, how's married life?" And I'd be like, "Listen, I'm going to be straight with you. It's hard. Living with a guy is hard because men and women process things completely differently, and I just was ill prepared for that. So my expectations were completely askew, and that takes my adaptation, I guess you could say. We have expectations for everything. We have expectations for our church, and we have expectations for when we get a new job. We go into it excited about the opportunity. I mean, obviously we wouldn't accept the job if we didn't have expectations of it being worthwhile, and then maybe 6 months to a year down the road, those expectations aren't met. We haven't got the raise that we wanted, or just things just didn't work out the way that we thought they would. Our boss, who seemed cool in the beginning, we expected to be lenient about being 2 minutes late to work, and he's not. We have expectations for the products and services that we buy, and for the way that customer service is going to be provided to us by those companies, expectations for our church body. And that sometimes is one of the hardest, because we have a tendency to expect everyone in the church, especially those in leadership, to be perfect. And that's just impossible. And they're still human beings. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is everybody that we encounter is still a human being, and we have expectations for them to be a certain way, and usually those expectations are unrealistic. So another personal story, I don't have the greatest relationship with some family members, and it's not strong and solid, and I have these expectations. I had them for a really long time of it being something that it was incapable of being, and it was realizing that my expectations were askew that really brought me to a place of acceptance of the situation. We can't allow ourselves to try and make everyone else happy. Instead we must accept who God has called us to be, and accept who God has made them to be, and accept that people have struggles and they're still struggling through things, and letting us down is a matter of where our expectations were and what they were capable of. So I was reading up on the topic, and I found a statistic that There was no quote of where it came from, but it sounded really good. So I may be inaccurate here. But it did say that 80% of our expectations are assumed and never expressed. And I think that's our number one flaw in our expectations and disappointment when it comes to other people, is that we assume things. We assume that they're going to meet certain criteria for us. We put those expectations in place, but we keep them to ourselves and we don't express them. So the first step to managing your expectations of other people is to express what your expectations are. The second step would be keeping those expectations realistic, knowing what people are capable of as human beings and as individuals. And really, the third step is having negotiable expectations, realizing that they need to change occasionally. They may not always stay the same. And it's kind of like a cycle, when you negotiate those expectations because you're expressing them to someone and you decide whether or not that is realistic. So all three of those things work cohesively to express your expectations, to make sure they're realistic, and for them to be negotiable. I want to encourage you on your own time to read Ephesians 4, verse 25 through 32, if you're a Bible reader. And that would give you some great insight on how we're to treat one another and where our expectations should be, in that realizing that we are all human beings and we are all flawed. And it's really important, again, to communicate that. I had a previous friendship where it was me and two other gals, and they had expectations of me that I was not aware of. And they kept that to themselves, and after a couple of years decided that I was a terrible friend because I wasn't meeting their expectations, but I was not aware that they had these things that they needed of me. I was being the best friend that I knew how to be at that time, but it wasn't what they were looking for. And rather than express those expectations to me so that we could negotiate them and make them realistic, they decided that I just wasn't a good friend. And I learned a lot from that, and managing my expectations was one of those things. So communicate, make sure your expectations are realistic, and make sure they're negotiable so that you can maintain relationships with people in a viable and realistic sort of way. So I hope this is helpful to you. If you thought that it was, if you thought it was great information, please feel free to share this post so that others can hear it. And again, I'm Michelle Kramer, Live Abundantly, and I'm here to help you. So feel free to comment or message me if you need anything. Have a wonderful afternoon.